They also, however, reopen a question that Grotius had failed to deal with adequately, and which preoccupied his successors. For Hume's approach implicitly rejects the Lockean argument against the compatibility of slavery with the just social order. Slavery once more appears to be possible, if undesirable, aspect of natural society. Although he nowhere gives the issue a systematic treatment, Hume's response can be understood in the same terms as above. He attempts to demonstrate the degree of its undesirability, and thereby show that, once its effect is rightly understood, neither of the natural desires of self-love and utility encourage its implementation or protection. In the essay of Populousness of the Ancient Nations, he demonstrates the inhumanity of the ancient system of slavery, and thus its offensiveness to all generous sentiments. The major part of his criticism, however, is concerned to point up the hidden practical problems of a system of slavery, and thereby to show its disutility. By showing how unfavorably slave economies fared when compared with modern commercial society, Hume introduces an argument which was to receive a thorough treatment at the hands of Adam Smith. The argument cannot show that slavery violates an inalienable right, but it can show the absence of any reasons for promoting or allowing such a system. So, given his enthusiastic support for the virtues of commercial society, Hume's response to the problem of slavery is that commercial society renders it obsolete. Two further features of Hume's account remain to be addressed. The first is that the utility of a system of justice is distinct from its visible utility. Its advantages may at times be obscured, whether by short-sightedness, partiality, or other factors. For this reason, the development of a system of justice will typically be a slow growth over time, and therefore a historical construction. This is an important feature of Hume's account and shows up in two ways. The first is the importance of convention in the development of a stable system of property. For present purposes, the significant feature of Hume's account of convention is not merely that it illustrates how tacit, rather than express, agreements arise, but that it is clearly a process which occurs over time, becoming established by habit or custom. As such, it has local beginnings, steadily spreading outwards to other parts of human society as its advantages become more readily apparent. Secondly, justice is also a slow growth in that the rules of justice do not develop all at once, but steadily through the natural workings of the human mind, through either the natural association of ideas or rational reflection on the utility of particular innovations. Thus, Hume accounts for the origins of the four main rules of property: occupation, prescription, accession, and succession. Of these rules, the case of prescription is the most interesting, because it requires not merely the passage of time before it can arise at all. It is not a rule established before the fact, which is then applied as it comes to bear on particular cases, but it is affected by the influence of time on the human imagination itself. So, even though there is no original instinct to observe rules of property, time and the natural workings of the human mind combine to generate distinct inclinations to respect what is connected with others. He puts it in this way. Possession during a long tract of time conveys a title to any object, but as 'tis certain that, however everything be produced in time, there is nothing real that is produced by time, it follows that property being produced by time is not anything real in the objects, but is the offspring of the sentiments, on which alone time is found to have any influence. The particular rules of property, arising as they do from the natural workings of the human mind, arise necessarily and therefore naturally. They are not invented in advance of the specific circumstances which come to manifest them, and because they come to be manifest by convention, through the, in this respect, unaimed practices of ordinary individuals going about their everyday business, they also arise peacefully. This whole process occurs in time, steadily, as the exigencies of human life come to bear. So Hume's theory also implies that property has a natural history, as the 17th century natural jurists assumed. The second important feature of Hume's account is its only limited success in resolving the very problem he set out to solve, the problem of the motivation to be just, especially in hard cases like Hutcheson's problem of external rights. In Hume's theory, the problem has the following form. What is our motive for observing the rules of justice? It is the sense of justice, the sense of duty. This sense is not the original foundation of justice, because justice arises from the rational apprehension of the utility of the rules of justice. Rational insight, being merely instrumental to the achievement of our goals, cannot motivate the will to perform just acts, and the sentiment which would be most useful in prompting us towards just acts, love of humanity as a whole, does not exist. So although in specific cases, such as those involving prescription, there may be natural associations of ideas which prompt the observance of the rule, in the main, the performance of just acts depends on the sense of duty. Again, however, as Hutcheson and Hume are aware, and Kames in particular emphasizes, the sense of duty has no durable motivational base. Duty is not the appearance of beauty. In many ordinary cases where there is no contrary moral beauty to contend against, or where self-interest does not intervene, this shortcoming in the motive to be just may not matter much. But in the not infrequent cases where these limits do not obtain, the motivation to perform the just action is notoriously weak, and the frequency of acts of injustice are a visible reminder that this is so. What then can prop up the sense of duty and protect the fragile edifice of justice from erosion? Hume recognizes the problem, and at the very end of the second inquiry attempts to meet it. He notes that if we treat vice with the greatest candor, then, in the case of justice, a man taking things in a certain light may often seem to be a loser by his integrity. A man may therefore decide to observe the rules of justice when it suits him, but not otherwise. That honesty is the best policy may be a good general rule, but is liable to many exceptions, and he, it may perhaps be thought, conducts himself with most wisdom, who observes the general rule and takes advantage of all the exceptions. The man who decides this has a difficult task confronting him, since, as Glaucon describes such a man in the Republic, he must maintain the appearance of acting justly, if he is to maintain control of his situation. The completely unjust man must be perfect in his wickedness. With his eye on views like Glaucon's, Hume remarks that one stimulus to acting justly is therefore the frequent pleasure of seeing knaves, with all their pretended cunning and abilities, betrayed by their own maxims. He offers this only as an incidental support. His principal objection to opportunism is that it is incompatible with personal integrity. Before extolling the pleasures of integrity, however, he has to admit that it does not always cut a lot of ice. I must confess that if a man think that this reasoning much requires an answer, it will be a little difficult to find any which will to him appear satisfactory and convincing. If his heart rebel not against such pernicious maxims, if he feel no reluctance to the thoughts of villainy or baseness, he has indeed lost a considerable motive to virtue, and we may expect that his practice will be answerable to his speculation. But in all ingenious natures, the antipathy to treachery and roguery is too strong to be counterbalanced by any views of profit or pecuniary advantage. Inward peace of mind, consciousness of integrity, a satisfactory review of our own conduct, these are circumstances very requisite to happiness, and will be cherished and cultivated by every honest man who feels the importance of them. Indeed they will, but as an answer to the problem of the motivation to justice, this is in fact a counsel of despair. It amounts to saying only that those who feel the importance of justice, who feel strongly the sense of duty, will continue to observe it, even when not to their advantage, and gain pleasure from doing so, but that those who do not, will not. And since the problem of the motivation to be just most concerns those who are not strongly moved by the sense of duty, then the problem has not been resolved, merely restated. If we may read between the lines a little, it seems that Hume may be aware that the problem remains, for he ends the discussion and the work itself with a further recommendation of the pleasures of a good character. This time, however, there is a significant twist. Instead of appealing to the pleasures of a good character as a reason simply for observing the rules of justice, and thus for eschewing opportunism, the goods of character are invoked as an alternative, indeed an antidote to the preoccupation with material goods which makes the system of justice such a vital feature of the social order, even after the basic necessities of survival have been satisfied. The pleasures of personal integrity are transformed from a support for the system to a form of insulation against its shallow pleasures. So he concludes that the opportunists are the real losers. Were they ever so secret and successful, the honest man, if he has any tincture of philosophy, or even common observation and reflection, will discover that they themselves are, in the end, the greatest dupes, and have sacrificed the invaluable enjoyment of a character, with themselves at least, for the acquisition of worthless toys and gewgaws. How little is requisite to supply the necessities of nature? And in a view to pleasure, what comparison between the unbought satisfaction of conversation, society, study, even health, and the common beauties of nature, but above all the peaceful reflection on one's own conduct? What comparison, I say, between these and the feverish empty amusement of luxury and expense? These natural pleasures indeed are really without price, both because they are below all the price in their attainment and above it in their enjoyment. In all probability, those with the tincture of philosophy will agree. Even so, the practical problem remains, because many lack entirely this tincture, and, even more commonly, many come to possess it only after the fact, having experienced at first hand the deceptions and the insecurities of toys and gewgaws. For the unphilosophical and the inexperienced, no mean proportion of mankind, the problem of the allurements of injustice is a pressing one, and ironically Hume himself in another passage emphasizes that it is so. Unlike other passions, which are quite inconstant, material interests, he says, are constant and difficult to restrain. This avidity alone of acquiring goods and possessions for ourselves and our nearest friends is insatiable, perpetual, universal, and directly destructive of society. So the problem of the weakness of the motive to respect what is another's cannot, for society at large, be settled by an appeal to the superior pleasures of conversation, society, study, etc. In any case, it is very surprising that Hume should have taken this particular tack. For in his political essays, the avaricious pursuit of material wealth plays a different role. In the essay of Commerce, for example, he rejects, because too difficult to support, the possibility of founding social advantage on a disinterested regard for the public good, and concludes instead that it is requisite to govern men by other passions, and animate them with a spirit of avarice and industry, art and luxury. And in Of Refinement of the Arts, he argues that the ages of refinement are both the happiest and the most virtuous. His reasons include the not implausible claim that happiness depends on purposeful activity. In times when industry and arts flourish, men are kept in perpetual occupation, and enjoy as their reward the occupation itself, as well as these pleasures which are the fruit of their labor. The mind acquires new vigor, enlarges its powers and faculties, and by an assiduity in honest industry both satisfies its natural appetites and prevents the growth of unnatural ones, which commonly spring up when nourished by ease and idleness. If all this is so, then there is a closer connection, even if indirect, between the pursuit of material prosperity and happiness than the closing remarks of the second inquiry suggest. So the problem of containing the motive to acquire material goods within just bounds cannot be easily overcome, even though, as Hume goes on to argue in Of Refinement in the Arts, the pleasures of the industrious society depend partly on the fact that people flock into cities and develop a more sociable way of life, where they come to receive and communicate knowledge, to show their wit or their breeding, their taste in conversation or living. Both sexes meet in an easy and sociable manner, and the tempers of men, as well as their behavior, refine apace. The connections between industry, happiness, and the cultivation of virtues are too close to allow the problem of the motive to respect what is another's to be solved by abandoning the desire for material goods. In Hume's moral and political thought, the relationship between motives to material advancement and to respecting what is another's remains awkward and complex.